I'd like to welcome Harris, and first of all say obviously congratulations on another amazing job. So, I mean, a lot of interesting things about this film. First of all, it is very belatedly a sequel. And I was a little interested to sort of maybe start off by talking a bit about what conversations you had before shooting with Tim about how this should relate to the original film.
Well, the first thing Tim said is, because a lot of people asked him that, was that I've already made Beetlejuice, so let's move on from there. Because I think a lot of people just had a bit too much, in Tim's mind, reverence for the film, the first film, and I guess the idea was that it's obviously a sequel, and the script tells you kind of where to go. And there were certainly things that we wanted to keep in terms of style, and in particular, I think, attitude, rather than anything else. But after that, as long as we could rely on in-camera effects and puppeteering and doing things kind of in the spirit of the original kind of first part of Beetlejuice, then I think it was a game on for everyone to kind of bring something to the table.
But it was nice. I mean, it sort of revisited that aerial shot that's at the beginning of the original film, and you know, it feels like it is part of the same universe, while obviously being a kind of evolution. So, in terms of what your aims were with what you wanted to achieve visually, what were the things that kind of you specifically set out to do in terms of the look?
I would say number one, and I don't know how to kind of put it any more, is the attitude. I think they really had a great attitude in making the first one, and it was really playful, number one. I mean, I would say mischievous. Playful isn't enough in a way. And that those things kind of had to be there. There's this kind of sense of just, when you're working, it's one thing working with an ensemble cast, which we had, but it's another thing working really in that level of ensemble filmmaking, in that, for example, you take the boiler room with the shrinkers. That is a performer with a shirt up to here so they can't see, and an animatronic head, and 3 guys on servos, puppeteers, that do the eyes and the nose and the mouth. Now that's a lot of coordination. And then Michael Keaton comes in, and he's like a prize bullfighter. You put him in the ring, and he goes, and there's a certain level of energy, because he's also, 73, and that's a lot of energy in a performance like that. And you just have to make it work. There were about 30 lighting cues in a scene like that. And it's just a tremendous energy, and you just got to get it right. Because if you fail or someone fails along the way, there is a kind of knock-on effect in how long does it take to reset, how long does it take to get the energy back up, and still stay kind of playful and mischievous in all of this.
So did that mean that kind of in terms of the day-to-day, shot-making process, it was like Tim's pretty organised, or is there...
He's very organised in his head. We never storyboarded. We certainly had ideas. We certainly rehearsed. But you don't see anything extra. Like, there's not one single deleted scene. That's everything we shot, and not many lost shots from scenes. So it's quite sparse in what you do, and he just thinks methodically. He's pretty much drawn the film out, but he hasn't drawn it in terms of shot to shot. He's drawn the sets and the costumes and the concept and all of that. And he's a man of very few words, but I felt that there was a lot of catching up with in my world without having to ask many questions. When you have someone that doesn't like speaking too much,
and ask a small number of questions,
and very good ones, and also what could you learn without having to ask that question? So, just revisit all the films. What kind of framing? And I do this with most directors that it's the first time. It's just, I also felt in particular, after having kind of 15 years of almost only working with Ken, that kind of starting with someone new, you have to backtrack a little and make that relationship start from earlier from my point of view, if that makes any sense. And that had to do with revisiting a lot of the films, figuring out, okay, does Tim like Day for Night? Does he like Normal Night? Are there kind of patterns of framing and
Well,
colour?
I thought it was interesting because actually, in terms of framing, the original and this film are both less kind of crazy wide angle, which he does sometimes, but not always. This felt like it had a more classical, you know, kind of focal length range.
I mean, it's already crazy. I think I would say Beetlejuice was his craziest film in that kind of in that imagination of something completely out there. So you've got to be a little simple. You've got to just give space for the audience to see this and feel this as well. You know, and also it was great. I had all my team, but I had Des Whelan as well. And Des has worked with Tim for 20 years as an operator, so it was great to have that kind of fallback of someone who had a familiarity with the technique. You know, after a couple of days, Des said, "Oh, this is going swimmingly well," in his very characteristic way, and it just did, because I think everyone was on the same page.
So tell us a bit about the bicycling scene, because I mean, I was convinced she was going to die in that scene. I was somewhat disappointed. But it was lots of fun. I liked, you'd obviously done some interesting rigs there. Was there anything unusual about that?
Well, I think it was unusual, and I was asked, do I want a Russian arm? What did I want? And I said, I want an FX3 and a bicycle. And they all looked at me, and they said, what do you mean? We're going all that way to Vermont, and you want a bicycle and a $3,000 camera? And I was like, well, it's really about her. She's gone through all this emotion, Jenna, and again, how do you keep it mischievous and playful? And one of the ways you do that, I think, is, well, first of all, you have her ride a bike, and you want to get those shots quite close, and stay within that format of, you know, it's quite a wide, not, I wouldn't say close up, but mid shot, or tight mid shot. So that's a consumer Ronin. Little Ronin with an FX3, and can't remember if it was my Leica lens or my Sigma lens, but stuff I use for recceing and my own stills photography. And then we used an American crew while we were out there. So Frank was my key grip out there, but Malcolm Hughes, my key grip for the majority of the film and most of my films, experimented a little in Leavesden with what happens when you put a little Ronin on the back of a bike with an FX3, and just so the camera's as mobile, flexible as the character. And Frank really took that to heart. He started.
And were you actually operating it remotely as well, or
there was? Yes, there was. So Des was remotely working that camera as well, and literally it was that plus some very simple rigs that were just hard mounted onto a bicycle, and I would say Jenna did 80% of it, and we had a stunt double for when we couldn't see her face, and we literally plotted it out and ran it through, but that was the whole point. I think equipment can get in the way sometimes, and I think choosing a simple option is, I think you just have to go with your instinct and trust it. I was asked, I don't know how many times for that particular one, are you sure you don't want more stuff? And I said no.
Yeah, it worked really well.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about that black and white flashback I love the look of. What was your...
So I started, well, when we started talking about the first part of the film and the Ghost House show, she visits it wasn't scripted as It Sees Into Night, but it just made perfect sense to, like, quite quickly pay homage to the Beetlejuice green. And I'd attached a phosphor night, very early kind of 80s phosphor night vision lens to a film camera, a 35mm film camera with a primo lens on sleuth for all the kind of infrared night work there. And so I thought, well, that could be really interesting. So I had a look at the one that Panavision had that's been there for decades. And basically, you're rephotographing. What we did back then was rephotograph the image on that lens with a 35mm lens. And obviously, infrared and night vision has developed since then. So we looked into it, and most infrared filters are removable from a camera. Some are removable permanently. I mean, I know you love infrared, so, and if anyone hasn't seen Jake's infrared stills photography, it's absolutely magnificent, and it's a real art. But we looked at the cameras that we could remove infrared filters on, and looked into how we could create that kind of wildlife night vision look where you get the kind of pupils dilating, etc. So pupils dilate when there's absolutely no light. So you've got to put an actor, or in the case of wildlife photography, you've got to put, the animals are in total darkness, their eyes dilate, and then infrared photography sees the kind of infrared spectrum, etc. Now, it doesn't come out as green. You have to dial that in.
Right, so it's black and white.
I mean, it's a very strange color. If you go for full spectrum infrared and take the filter off the camera, you get this extremely weird color that you can push in a few different directions, including a really great black and white. And I know when we were students, we were obsessed with I Am Cuba and Sergei Yurosevsky and The Cranes Are Flying. Those are two really kind of important films to me. So that had always been something, one day I'm going to do some kind of black and white infrared on a film. And of course, that was daylight as well. But these were nighttime exteriors. So from there, the black and white came into place. Like, I found a look for the TV show, and I thought it would be really interesting to do some black and white infrared for the flashback, because it has that old quality. It kind of, the exposure's kind of very harsh, and the idea was basically to expose it with either candlelight or some tungsten, and then convert it into black and white. I wanted to shoot something that looked like film as well, so I think that's when the experimentation to segue into that with Live Grain came in. So I called Sonny up at Live Grain, and he did a demo for us, and we went through a whole list of emulsions that we could potentially use, and I said, what's your oldest film stock? And it was, I think, I can't remember, it was a Plus X or a Tri-X or something like that. But he says, I have been trying to get hold of some silver nitrate stock. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with Live Grain, but basically they take hundreds of feet of film, they process it, they scan it, and then they use the old Kodak or Agfa or Fuji charts and map out where how the grain works in various aspects of the density and the color. And they call it texture mapping. And you can really choose a film stock that you want, and it is that real film stock. And then you have a kind of an amount that you can add. Or,
a percentage.
Yeah, but it's a really simple.
Is that something that you were getting applied to the dailies, or was that happening just at the end?
I did it just at the end, but you can apply it. Once you've paid for it, you can apply it to the dailies. But basically, what was a real thing, and it took about a year, because he had tried to, I think Sonny had tried to develop some nitrate stock in the past, and most of it had been refrigerated. It just turned to dust or soup. But he managed to get, I think, a 50 ASA and 100 ASA, which were emulsion 1 and 2 from 1938, and they were nitrate stocks, and they were frozen rather than refrigerated. So they were able to successfully kind of develop it scan it, and then kind of apply their method of texture mapping. And what you have, of course, is that would have been then scanned silver, as opposed to when you're scanning a developed film emulsion, you're scanning the pigment that's left behind after the bleach bypass. So that was interesting to me, that you're actually applying scanned silver to the image as well. So that has a different quality. I've done 2 films, my first 2 films, Camera Obscura and Mr. In Between, had a bleach bypass. And that really desaturates the color, because you've got silver basically mixed with color pigment. And Tim had done Sleepy Hollow that way as well. And so I described it to Tim, and I said, you can have the texture that you have with a bleach bypass, but you can actually manipulate the color exactly the way you want it. So I had to use a very vibrant red on Camera Obscura and Mr. In Between to get blood red. And Tim had to do the same on Sleepy Hollow. You don't have those issues. So in the end, what we did is we applied it throughout the whole film. It wasn't just used on the black. We liked it so much.
What kind of percentage was that?
I cranked it to 11. The more I pushed, the more he said, I want more. So that is pretty cranked up. And there's another thing that you can add, which is a kind of opacity. So you can either push it forward or push it back, but it's pretty cranked up. Funnily enough, it's a very fine grain stock.
As luck would have it.
Because it's a really, and nitrates, it was so interesting even talking about it. I mean, it's made, nitrates kind of, to create a silver nitrate, it's like crushed bones and salt. So there was a bit of a horror, he loved that, Tim, that we were adding something that was silver mixed with crushed bones. That certainly added to his kind of fascination with the process.
And in terms of the lighting, were there any specific things you were trying that were new for you with this film?
Not particularly so much new as opposed to just combinations of many things. I mean, it was very music video-ish in that respect, in the experimentation of it, especially with the afterlife. Like, I just thought it should be changing and shouldn't be a stand. I wanted to pay homage to the green of the afterlife and not make the audience feel like it's very unfamiliar, that it's the same thing, but that it just had that thing. And I think that has to do with, I don't know, a ghost story or anything like that, where things have to kind of, that perception of things, if there's something moving all the time, I think it just helps. And again, in not being that set with rules. So could you use a candle effect and mix it in? I thought you could. And so we did things like that.
Certainly nobody's going to say, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah. So that idea of lighting cues and things changing and cycles of color, and we kind of built a palette and we showed it to Tim and did some tests, and then he told us what he liked and what he didn't like. And then Dan and I just kind of had a loop. Again, in terms of cueing a lot of stuff, Dan got me a little mixer that I could just put on and be by the monitor. Dan is always better than me at the cues, but I think in this case it just seemed to make sense to be near to him.
So he did that classic gaffer thing, saying, you do it.
Exactly.
If you didn't like it.
Yeah, it just seemed to work better in this case. And of course he did it often as well. And of course Chris, our desk op, did it often as well.
So that little mixer just had a bunch of channels that were coming from him?
Yes, and some of it was to change effects and some of it was to speed up or slow down things. It was really intuitive. There wasn't that much philosophy really behind it. It just, in the rehearsal of the day and the blocking it out and watching the performance, you got a feel for it.
So the location, I mean, it is like you're actually very lucky because, I mean, you must have been there at just the right time of year for the leaves changing colour, but it was a little bit more complicated than that, right?
It was a bit more complicated than that. We shot in July. We were meant to shoot Boston, and we shot from April through to July. It was a 40. Now my maths is going to come out, but it was around about a 50-day shoot.
45, at least then 9 weeks.
45. I think with the additional photography ended up being 50. But basically, we ended up in Vermont with the Boston shoot to do at the end, in the beginning of July, and then the strike happened. So we got to shoot Vermont and East Corinth, which plays for Winter River, but it was summer.
Oh.
And we did some color correction and a little bit of compositing to pick out certain areas to do that. But then what happened is when the strike was over, we went back to Boston. So we managed, by the skin of our teeth, to just, by 11 o'clock on Thursday when the strike was about to happen, literally we shot up until the last minute and did about 5 days work in 3. Because what we wanted to do is wrap East Corinth, which had the house built, and then go to Boston, which had basically the streets for the bicycle, and Jeremy's house, Manchester by the Sea, had slightly better scenery and kind of hilly roads for that. And we did that in November, or late October, whenever the strike was over, and it was absolutely perfect. So we actually got something that was perfect autumn, and that played as a reference for everything else in the color correction.
Yeah, no, it looked lovely.
Rob Pitsey, I give him the credit.
We've got a couple of microphones, and if it's okay with you, I think we'll take some questions from you guys now. If you have any questions. Oh, there we go.
Thanks for that. Can you tell us how you first got connected with Tim and a bit more about your prep process, please?
Well, there was an interview process. I'd worked with his producer, Tommy Harper, before, and we pretty much started straight away going to locations. The prep was predominantly around designing the lighting for the stages. This was, I would say, 80% stage work and complete fantasy from one side, and then something that had to look very realistic and match in with exteriors.
So how many stages did you have? Because in 9 weeks you must have had
a lot of stages, because there are a lot of those sets are massive, and they're all in camera as well. There's almost no blue screen except for the sandworm.
And was that was like a principal thing, not doing kind of set extensions and?
Yes, that was his, and finding ways. So one of the biggest applications is I've been doing something since Mamma Mia, which is using very, very large areas of back projection. On Mamma Mia, it was something like 600 meters by 12 meters, just huge. Instead of blue screen, you set up these back projection screens. And back then it was flow banks with green, blue, and daylight white tubes in, and some Mac 2000s, which were robotic lights, to create either kind of skies or seascapes, etc., but with lights, not with projected images. And then on Death on the Nile, we just had more of that, where we just wanted to have a kind of just like a sky color rather than a blue. So we used, that was almost 1 kilometer by 15 meters high with 700 sky panels. And that you can...
Is that blue generated from the lamp, or was it?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, but you can color it in. So if it's a sunset, you just do a sunset color. And then when you're not looking at it, well, part of that is that if we did blue screen, we would have used 400 sky panels pointing at the wall. And I thought, well, I'd rather use 700 sky panels pointing at the actors in the set, because it's ridiculous the amount of lampage you use just to light blue screen. Mm. Not the sets, not the actors, but the...
something which you're just going to remove.
Something that you're going to remove. So I applied that thought to a lot of and that took a lot of time to figure out. So that is what you see outside the windows of the boiler room for the shrinkers, for example. And that had a particular pattern. But it's also what you see outside the Dietz house. So it either had dialed all the way down to a very deep blue for a night sky with a grad, because you can kind of put the grad in, or you can almost white out for a kind of sunny day outside. And it was also in Jackson's office, and then what we would, with fantastic kind of production designer Mark Scruton, we just found various ways of breaking it up as well, and that's what gave you that kind of blue, green to purple glow that we had. So it was just trying to find, and the sets, I think Tim just wants big sets, so they just ended up, there were a lot of sets, very few days, we ran out of space, and you're just on the wall. So just planning that out took an enormous amount of time and testing. And then, I mean, just the whole kind of how to get through the puppeteering as well was a lot of testing. But it was literally, you go from a concept to a test to an application to making it work within the budget. This wasn't either a big budget or a big schedule. So there was a lot of play there. And doing it visually. I mean, I certainly looked at some Mario Bava films because Tim really loves them.
But you didn't want to replicate them.
I don't think anything was it's again being inspired. They're very playful, and they're like, and actually Mario Bava is not just a horror director. It's amazing. He's done like spaghetti westerns. It's a real kind of crazy mix of films. To me, a lot of the the one inspiration I got that I showed Tim that got me in that mode of colors and the floating people, etc., was Chagall. Mm-hmm. So Chagall has a lot of paintings of just lovers intertwined in red dresses against blue and green. And things like that, I mean, he'd already sketched it out. I just said it looked like a Chagall to me. So I don't know what, but that was just a way for Tim to then say, you're on the right track, like if you show him something like that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think sometimes with directors like that, they have made it in their head, and they just need you to show them the things that they already have visualized in a way,
And finding an economy. I think that was the other thing in prep, in finding an economy of shots and an economy of making things. So, for example, that church waltz, I mean, that's 3 or 4 minutes long, that musical piece. And we were like, God, we had 4 days to shoot all of that. So how do you do all of that, including kind of the other scenes? So one way is to try and find ways that you minimize the coverage. So with Malcolm, we'd worked a lot, my key grip, with kind of using just really simple stuff like sliders, but spinning them around actors. So we did it on Haunting in Venice, and just spun it around our actress when she was in a seance. And I was like, Malcolm, do you know, I want to do something like that, but I want you to put it on a dolly, and they need to be able to dance. And I mean, God, his engineering brain went a bit nuts. But we had a few kind of lost hours to actors getting COVID, and I hate wasting time. So we had to kind of tool down for 3-4 hours, I remember, one day. And I'm like, Malcolm, I know you've done it, but build it. Can you build it now? We've got 3 hours. And let's do a demo, and let's get the choreography in, and let's show Tim a shot where it does the entire 3 minutes of the song that you want, and they just sit on it, and we will spin round. They'll pretend like they're dancing, and I want them to spin, and I want the camera to spin, and I want it to move. So he sat there, and he did the maths, and he taught it to his team, and he kind of put a few things together, and we recorded it. And recorded it to the music to see if it would actually. Now they did cut into it, but that was that was just a way of figuring out, well, if you don't do that, you're going to be into an awful lot of coverage. And wherever I found a way, a bit like putting the camera on the bicycle, Tim liked that idea. It just removed the idea of a lot of coverage and gives you a game plan to start with, in a way. And it gives you something. So a lot of that was, how do you get, and this was what I was trying to think in prep, how do you stay on an actor and get a close-up, but also get how they're thinking and what their POV is. So I think that's always an interesting kind of concept to try and do photographically, because it often just eliminates the need for excessive coverage.
And how many cameras were you running in a sequence like that?
Tim doesn't particularly like more than one camera because he's so focused on what he's doing. But we often shot with 2 cameras, more than I would say that he is used to. But, you know, he's used to 15, 16-week schedules, you know, massively different from what we were doing here. But I think having shot Wednesday and being on a TV schedule that was very fast, really got him excited about a fast, low-budget kind of approach.
Relatively low budget.
Yeah.
Okay, we had somebody else with a question, but I don't know who it was.
I want to be selfish and ask 2 questions in one while I've got the mic. It was really interesting hearing you say about how many days you got to shoot like the waltz scene, and I was just curious if there was a particular scene that was like way longer in terms of how many days it took to shoot than that. And then my other question was just around, I noticed the way the lens that was used in the scene where she is having the kiss with the boy, and it kind of went very crazy and stylized. And I just wondered, you know, how you mixed it up with lenses to kind of lean into those emotional moments.
There wasn't one scene more than another, really, because we were stuck to our schedule and we kept it. I don't think we went over. I think our only problems were we were still having to deal with some COVID issues on that production where actors had to basically leave. That's the only thing that scuppered us schedule-wise and day-wise, but everything was allocated a particular time and a particular page count, and we stuck to it. In terms of the candle sequence where she realizes he's a ghost, I used Ultra Panatar 2s predominantly, and some Ultra Panatars and some Auto Panatars. But the difference that you see there is I fix on an f-stop, usually, and it just happens to usually be around 4. And so most of the film was shot at a 4 or a 5.6. What you're seeing, which is a slight difference there, is I shot at a 2.8. So that literally, and I think when you're only using 2 or 3 lenses out of your package, and you're only using one f-stop, any slight deviation to that, you know, you're predominantly that much lower than the eye line or that much higher than an eye line. You create a certain language that I think the audience gets accustomed to, and then a micro adjustment can become a huge change and offer an altered reality. And I'm always really fascinated by that. That is literally I think, and in some shots, probably not even a stop, 2/3 of a stop difference.
So tell us a bit about the Auto Panatars. Because what aspect ratio? This was...
It's 1:8:5. So one of the things I really like is, again, having shot 2 films on 65mm, and you get used to a real high fidelity. And one of the things about digital cameras, especially when the LF Mini came out, and then for me, the Sony Venice 2 in this case, was the idea of this VistaVision size sensor. You're starting to creep into that kind of... It alters the way that portraiture is kind of done. But I was looking at Tim likes 185. I haven't done a lot of 185, but I have recently. Haunting in Venice and Belfast was 185, and so it was just automatic that we'd shoot 185. Again, in looking for a way of using the Sony Venice 2 at its highest fidelity, I asked Charlie at Panavision to kind of go through what kind of squeeze options we had, and the auto and ultra Panatars. The autos were the kind of original Ben-Hur lenses. They were made for 65mm to turn 65mm into a 2.67 aspect ratio in a 70mm print. And they have a 1.3 squeeze on the horizontal. They happen to turn a kind of Vista Vision size and aspect ratio sensor like the Sony Venice 2 into pretty much a 1.9 at its full resolution and something like 8.3 when you crop for 185. So I was just looking for that aspect ratio in the highest fidelity. And Panavision had made a modern set. So the Auto Panatars are the oldest, then they made Ultra Panatars, and there's only about 2 or 3 sets of each, and I think they're magnificent, magnificent lenses. They just have the right fall-off, they're not too anamorphic, they're not too spherical, they're just exceptional lenses, and the Ultra Panatar 2s are kind of modern versions of that can be, that multiple sets can be.
Right, you can put them on drones.
And you can, and not be precious that, because I do think they're the kind of Panavision crown jewels. To me, the autos and the ultras, the originals, are the primo of all primos. So it's nice to have a set that's readily available, that's kind of can be made in large numbers.
Okay, here on the third row.
Just wondering how much time you had in preps and how much time you had in the grade.
Good questions. I think I must have done about at least 8 weeks prep, maybe 9. I had one thing I've been trying to do on a grade, I had a slightly extended grade on this through a process of trying to use our money wisely. One of the things that often happens is you have a preview grade where a film goes into audience testing and reviewing. And there is some time allotted to a small grade there. But unfortunately, it's usually done off the Avid output. So I find that it goes to Goldcrest and Rob Pitsey, who's my colorist, and we're doing it off an Avid output, and I've always felt it was wasted. Warners were kind of gracious enough to say, after kind of me going on about this, that we actually conform to 4K and use that preview time wisely. And they added days as well there. So I got a initial grade that was funded by the preview grade fund, and then I got my 2 weeks, which became 3 weeks at the end for the final grade. But it's usually 2, sometimes 3 weeks, and I got an extension because I managed to just manipulate some funding and I think in a good way for the production as well, because it's the kind of film that the testing and the preview testing would be, the scores would be based on very much on the experience that you have in the theater. So the better the experience and the closer it is to the final film, the better the test ratings would have been.
Do you know how it did test?
There were about 4 sets of, there were notes, and those notes were addressed. And then some, Tim just said, I'm not addressing.
Not doing that.
Yeah.
Okay, at the back there.
But it did test well from the beginning.
Right.
Yeah.
I just want to come off the back of that last question, and you said you had 8 weeks prep. How much of the set design, how much set construction was done by the time you came onto the production? And if you could just talk about your relationship with the production designer as well, because I mean it's a very production design centric film.
Very much so. They hadn't started construction when I walked in. They had to do it very quickly because it was greenlit last minute. This wasn't a very this was a slightly last minute green light. Mark Scruton and I had a fantastic relationship. He's one of the people I worked the most closely with. He had been working on the designs with Tim for quite a while. They worked together on Wednesday, so they had been planning and scheming for a while. And the first thing I did was really walk into Mark's office, and you could pretty much see the film designed on the walls. And I find that most production designers now they have more time, and they're all so good, and they have such great departments that the concept art and the production design art are usually quite evolved by the time you walk onto a project. I think also lucky enough to have worked with Beau Welsh in the past, who designed the original Beetlejuice, and is a good friend of mine. We made a film called Thor together, and we stayed in touch. And there were aspects of his design that are just in all his films, and I know, and that I saw in this. And Mark actually, one of the things, when I said to Mark, I've worked with Beau, he said, well, how does he get that that effect on the walls? And I said, he really loves car paint. And he did it on Thor. He'd just spray the walls with metallic car paint. So it was just, just a way of us talking, and just knowing when you've worked with someone. And Thor took forever to make. I mean, that was 2 years of work, basically. We really got to know each other and how each other kind of what our traits and maybe to put it in a Tim Burton, he says your repertoire. So I think Beau had a little repertoire that he brought onto the original, and Mark wanted to honor some of that and push it a lot further as well. So and I think that's why Beau gets a visual consultant credit in the film as well. So, but it was he and I worked very closely on how to make things work in camera. I think that was a big part of that collaboration. Like, what do we do outside the walls? How do we work with perspective? How do we shift that perspective? How do we hide certain things? That was a really fun, very, very fun part of the filmmaking process. I hope that answers the question.
Good, B+, I think that was. Okay, maybe one last question. Anybody has any burning things to ask? A hugely talented cinematographer who's here for a limited time only.
There's more in the audience, I'd say.
Oh, there's one.
Hi. Were there any scenes that in prep you had really clear vision on it, and then actually filming something came up or changed that you had to then improvise a bit or change things? And what was your, apart from the bike scene, what else was your favourite or worst scene to shoot?
I mean, my favourite, I really loved the boiler room and the shrinkers. I just got a real kick when they'd walk in. And I don't think, and it just, especially when you'd call cut and you'd see a little head come through the shirt because they were really hot. There was something about that. And I would also say another favourite was the immigration room. I mean, it was just bonkers. Basically, also, the other thing is that production said, we've got a whole bunch of dead people. We just want ideas from the entire crew, and they meant the entire crew, about how did people die? So, you know, from a shark bite to a javelin through it. There was a really great spirit of playfulness in all of that. And then when you finally got there, it was hard to kind of stop smiling. The church scene was probably quite, I would say, quite a challenge.
Bit of a sleepless night.
It was just a lot to get through. I think that was our most time-pressured part, and you knew that was going to be quite significant. You know, it had to, there's also just the thought that it's such a bizarre song as well that Tim's chosen.
Yeah, what is that song?
Well, that was a #1. That was a huge hit, you know. But again, it's just it's bonkers. I think Tim just loved the idea that it talked about a cake and you know,
baking it
and baking it. You don't really get a lot of answers about that, but you know you're dealing with someone that's really, really thought about it. But yes, I'd say Boiler Room and Shrinkers, and then any time Willem Dafoe walked on set was another just a thrill. And the idea that you could do something a bit kind of like a badly lit film noir, I thought I excelled in badly lighting a film noir in Jackson's office.
That's now your repertoire.
Yes.
Good. Well, I just want to thank you, Harris, very much for coming down tonight and sharing these thoughts.
Jake.
And thank you, everybody, for your questions.
Thank you, Jake. Thanks for coming.